Wait, a little bit further up. There you go. Keeps going in and out.
All right, well, we're back anyway, so the music is so the music. I apologize for the technical difficulties here with our audio. That is our sound system brought to you by my LG phone, and Nick and Ben at Hominem.
Yes, sir.
So doing a little taking it as we were talking before, Ben, kicking it kind of old school here. We don't have a guest, and I think I just want to sort of elaborate again. I mean, I know the post was up there on the Facebook page. The reason we're not having a guest this week is because I think that you and I wanted to sort of take a step back, be able to assess the landscape right now that we're going through. I guess as a country, it'd probably be fair to say, and really gather our thoughts, do our diligence, read, right? Listen to podcasts, because that's what you and I do in our spare time, like a bunch of true nerds. And yeah, just bring our views to the table on everything that we've seen, the things we've listened about, some of the things we've heard, and the things that we've listened to. Is that fair?
Yeah, I mean, I think we put up a post on Facebook, indicating that we, for our next guest, we wanted to find somebody who, maybe had a unique, kind of a unique perspective on what's going on, so that we could share that and have a conversation about it. It's a tough conversation to have, and therefore we haven't really been able to find anybody, even though we have quite a few friends who, may be willing to at some point. We couldn't necessarily find anybody. We took a week of solidarity because obviously, it was a tragedy. There was a lot of emotions going on, and we didn't want to necessarily have a difficult conversation when the emotions were still so high. Not that they're not now, but definitely, right in the moment, it would have definitely been a little bit more intense. And so, we didn't want to break our rhythm, and so here we are, just having a conversation, just the two of us, for now, to make sure that we get an episode out to the viewers.
Yeah, for sure. So we're going to keep the format the same. Obviously, we're just going to keep it between you and I. And I think really opening up the dialogue, it probably makes sense to start with George Floyd, right? Like it probably. I think it's a topic that has really brought together a lot of communities. I know I can speak for down in North Carolina. The protests have been daily. There has been episodes of violence. So you see hear about some of the violence in the looting and stuff like that. There has been some reporting of that, but for the most part, it's been very peaceful. The news has done a lot of segments on just getting people's opinions and voices out there. It's been interesting to listen to for the most part. But I want to sort of ask you your holistic take on the actual incident, the situation as we know it right now with the arresting officers, or I should say former officers, right? Yeah. And the death of George Floyd. What's your take on the entire scenario?
Well, I mean, number one, you said it seems to have brought together a lot of communities. I'll go a step further and say that it absolutely has and should have. I think there's a consensus that this was reprehensible, for basically an officer to kneel on an individual's neck after he had been restrained for over 8 minutes, ultimately leading to his death. I know there's conflicting coroner reports and whatnot, but the most recent one has said he most likely died from asphyxiation, which would be a direct result from of that individual, of that officer kneeling on his neck. I think, like I said, there's a consensus among everyone that this was inexcusable, and that the not only the officer who perpetrated that specific action, but all of the officers that were there and didn't stop him, or participated in restraining him, be charged and brought to justice. That's the way I felt from it. Even if you take race out of it, that's the way that I felt about it from the beginning. It was a very obvious case of police brutality. And I felt immediately that those individuals should face the consequences for their actions, not just losing their jobs, but being charged as well.
Right. Yeah, and I align with you 100% on that. I know we briefly touched this topic when we had Adam on, and we talked about, you know, the George Floyd situation and just how I guess how like disturbing it was to watch that incident take place. I mean, you know, to your point, put the race stuff aside and just think of it from like a human aspect. You know, I listened to George Floyd's brother here in North Carolina. It wasn't in North Carolina. He did it recently, I think, was it to Congress, where he talked about, you know, watching his older brother beg for their mother as like part of his last. I mean, just I try to put myself in the family's perspective. I can't imagine, but I try to put myself in the family's perspective and just how angry and enraged it made me. With all of that being said, my mind didn't go into this is racially charged. This was a racially charged act. This was something that these officers targeted him because of his complexion. I looked at it as, if you, and this is a thought experiment, right? Because there's no way of knowing, but if you put George Floyd and replaced him with a white person who is of similar stature, similar scenario, similar size, that white person dies in that situation. That's my hypothesis, right?
Yeah, I mean, you know, it's certainly hard to say. There's no so here's the problem. Obviously, there is the narrative within society that this is inevitably race. That really, anytime you have a situation where a police officer who is white kills an individual who is black, it has to do with race. There's that, and then there's the other side of it where there's not necessarily any proof that that's the case, right? I mean, this could have just been a dick cop who was on a power trip that day and decided that this big individual, because of a complex, that the way he was going to restrain this individual was going to be to lean on his neck. And all of you people telling me to get off, I'm gonna lean on his neck anyway, just because I have all the power. You know, fuck all of you who are trying to get me to stop. And then it turned into this individual dying, George Floyd dying because of that officer's actions. And so again, it's hard to tell. I think the consensus was, again, that this was awful, and that this former police officer was an awful human being for what he did and deserved to pay the price. But again, I mean, that goes to a bigger question, because there is a difference between bias and, you know, implicit bias used in policing communities, and whether that necessarily means that there's racial animus, right? I mean, just because police officers, through their experiences or through their own implicit bias, may approach black individuals at a higher rate or even use force against black individuals at a higher rate, it doesn't necessarily mean that they themselves are out to kill a black individual. Does that make sense?
It does. Yeah. No, I'm following you. I think the aftermath. I think about how these these instances of police brutality start to become, I think it's a perfect segue to sort of the next topic, which I wanted to get into, was police brutality. I think that you see instances like this, and there's a correlation where the narrative automatically shifts towards race, right? There's also those instances where it still shifts towards race, even if it doesn't make any sense. So put George Floyd aside, and you insert somebody like a Freddie Gray, right? Who died in the hands of arresting officers in Baltimore. Was that 2016? Is what happened with Freddie Gray? Was 2016-ish?
Yeah, 2015, 2016, I think. Around
around that time.
Right.
So you have a situation with Freddie Gray, for example, where you had some of these same protests and some of these, the Black Lives Matter jumped all over the Freddie Gray situation, and you have a city in Baltimore, Maryland, that's mayor is black, the police commissioner is black, the second in command is black,
right?
The third in command is black. Most of the city legislation is black. So I think to race bait in those sort of scenarios, where it seems like we're very quick to jump into these racial assertions. And I do think before we have all the facts, especially, and I look at the George Floyd case with these officers, because to me, it seemed like a clear-cut case of police brutality. It seemed like almost a police corruption issue than a systemic racial issue amongst police officers. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And it's so tough, right? Because, in the aftermath, you had all of these people who wanted to try and be on the right side of the issue, even in the even in the political realm. You had politicians coming out and saying, basically saying that it's open season on black people in this country.
Right.
And I just think that is so far from the truth. Again, I don't want to dismiss implicit bias and the way that black individuals feel in this country, because I can't speak to the black experience. Obviously, any of us individuals have our own experiences, have our own perspectives. So I don't necessarily want to belittle the way that a black person feels in this country or feels the way that things are. But if you really look at the data and you really look at the numbers, we've talked about it before. Roland G. Fryer, one of the youngest tenured professors in Harvard history, went into a study believing that he was going to find that there was a huge amount of disproportion when discussing police officers' killing of black individuals versus white individuals, and found that while it did show instances of a higher rate of harassment towards black people, there was no disproportion when it came to the killing of black people, particularly because, again, I brought this up before, crime rates in black communities are higher, while black individuals are I think when based on population, 2.1 times more likely to be killed by police. They're also 2.1% more likely to be poor than white individuals. And so it goes to kind of the question of, what is the real issue here? Is it the poverty and the historical racism that has really held black communities down, that have led to certain factors that have contributed to poorer communities, or is it really that people are just racist? And so I lean towards one or the other. I don't know how you feel about it, but it just, again, it seems like, it does seem like there's always there's always racial context being put to every situation. And the outcome recently seems to always be, yes, this had to do with race, even though a lot of times there's no proof or statistical backing to support that.
Right. So there's obviously a lot to unpack here, and I think you brought up something that clicked with me as well. When you mentioned the Black experience, I think that one of the things that I've seen sort of used synonymously is understanding and experience, and they're two completely different things. And you and I have talked about this a little bit.
Right.
And it's ignorant of you or I to say that we understand the quote unquote Black experience. But to assert that we have no understanding is a completely different assertion, or it's something completely separate.
It's an argument. It's an argumentative fallacy meant to shut people up who the people supporting that narrative don't want to have a say or don't want to be part of the tough conversations.
Right.
So yeah, I completely agree with you there.
And I think, speaking of statistics, I pulled the numbers. I had heard this because I was doing a little bit of digging on the Freddie Gray incident and Michael Brown, some of the others. And I pulled these statistics back from 2016, so the year that Freddie Gray was killed in a police van, basically. The information that I found was actually pretty shocking. It came as a surprise to me, was that in 2016, there were 968 people killed by cops in this country. 968 people, just over 4% were Black.
Yep.
I mean, when you look at the raw data, those numbers are astounding. So the question that in terms of the narrative that they're astounding in terms of the narrative that we hear on a consistent basis right now with police brutality, I think.
Right.
So my question to you is, do you believe that United States police departments are systemically racist?
So I mean, so that's a tricky question, and I'll say no. On the whole, I don't believe that. I believe there are a million police officers in this country that have millions of interactions with individuals on a daily basis, and the fact that there are anywhere between 2 to 250 Black individuals killed each year,
or less.
I think that's evidence in itself. And so, again, I don't want to confuse what I'm saying objectively with how Black individuals feel subjectively, because, again, there's the experience to speak to. But again, it's tricky because when we talk about police departments, yes, there needs to be some reform, and I don't necessarily disagree with all of the talks right now on defunding police departments, and so people get confused there. They think that defunding police departments means that they're getting rid of they're disbanding, they're getting rid of police, which isn't the case. It's just they're allocating less funds to police departments, and I don't necessarily think that's a bad idea, because here's the thing: until it is shown that police departments in communities across the United States are doing more to affect positive change outside of just policing the community and traffic stops and this and that, I think it's the right move, because when you look at our policing compared to other countries, on the whole, there is a lot more fatality here in this country than there are in other countries. across Europe, across certain parts of Asia. So there definitely is something wrong here. But the statistics just don't support that it has to do with race. I do believe there's an implicit bias. I do believe that due to the poverty in Black communities and poverty in general among Black individuals in our society, there's always an implicit bias where a Black individual may fit a description, or there may be an implicit bias for a police officer to look into a Black individual walking down the street over a white individual. And that's where that experience, right? That's where that experience can be that's where the Black experience can be validated, because there is some fear and suspect action there that can be discussed. But in terms of the numbers in general, there's just not a whole lot supporting the fact that police departments in general are racist.
Right. I think before we get into the topic, because I wanted to bring up like the media and social media reaction of what's been going on. But you and I both know Sam Harris. For those who are listening, Sam Harris is a neuroscientist. He is probably best known for being an atheist, but he is a really world-renowned neuroscientist. He has groundbreaking research in fMRI, why people think the way that they do, things like that. And Coleman Hughes, who is a young gentleman, just recently graduated from Columbia University. He writes for local publications. He writes for nationally syndicated publications, and he has a podcast. And he had Sam Harris as one of his first guests on his podcast. I was listening, and based on Coleman Harris's view, aligning with Sam Harris's view, they drew a parallel that was compelling, in my opinion. And that parallel was for a lot of young families in Black communities in this country, you have a parent, an uncle, an older brother, a cousin, whatever it may be, basically passing down lessons to the youth that interactions with the police will always equal a negative result for you. When you see police come into our community, it's always for a bad reason. So when those instances happen, and from a young age, those children see these instances occur in their own communities to people in the neighborhood who they know, to family members that they know, it's the equivalence to what Christianity does with religion. It's you teach children that you were born inherently flawed. And in Black communities, it's because of the color of your skin. In Christian households, it's because Jesus died for your sins and you're a sinner at birth. And I think that instilling that mindset into children at any rate is morally reprehensible. And I think that that's what Sam Harris and Coleman Hughes both were articulating realistically, through that dialogue. And I think that for me, it really struck a chord.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's a great point. I mean, it's so, there's the concept of indoctrination on the whiteness side of things, right? That we, as we grow up, we're taught these different things in school that, taught about Christopher Columbus and, really Eurocentric history, right? I mean, it's a history. It's a history that most people view as like the white version of world history. And so there's the idea that there is an indoctrination on that side of things from the time that you're 5 till the time that you're 18, where you're that's what creates white privilege, right? I mean, there's just a lot of things that we don't have to think about because of the fact that we're white, and because of the fact that we grew up being taught that everything's going to be okay. Anytime you see a police officer, they're there to help you, like stuff like that. And there is some indoctrination on the other side, and not just in households, but also also among community leaders that I think escapes a lot of people, where we also have to understand that there's a lot of people that make money off of the fact that there is racial division in this country, right?
Right.
So there is a lot of motivation in Black communities, and amongst Black community leaders, to not necessarily paint the best picture of society in the United States as a whole. So, again, there certainly is indoctrination on both sides, where, yes, on one side, there is kind of a whitewashed version of history that we're teaching in the schools, and that may certainly be something that needs to change if we're going to be able to have discussions over future generations on the way things actually happen and the way to move forward. But there's also indoctrination on the other side, where it's like we're basically telling these kids that the minute they have any type of independent, intelligent thought, that, hey, just so you know, there's a force in the United States that's keeping you down, and you probably shouldn't have any huge dreams or goals, because in this society, in this system, you're probably not going to reach them.
Right.
And I think that's awful.
Right. Yeah. One of the last things I want to just sort of point out here was a separate conversation that Coleman Hughes had with Dave Rubin. Dave Rubin runs a syndicated talk show. Really, it's called the Rubin Report.
Yeah.
He has all kinds of opposing views on there, and he had Coleman Hughes on to the podcast, and Coleman brought up the topic got brought up of systemic racism, especially pertaining to the police, right? But Coleman brought up the fact that somehow the conversation geared towards referring to Black people as African Americans, and Coleman Hughes was like, it's a misnomer, right? Like it's something where to find out, if we use this thought experiment to find out whether or not there is systemic racism, you could simply use a study that was done, and I believe that this study was done in the 70s by Thomas Sowell.
Mm-hmm.
And this is the study that Hughes cited, where he mentioned that to a police officer, a Black person with African American roots and a Black person with West Indian roots, there's visually not going to be able to tell.
Right.
Right. So in a systemic racist model, there's no way for let's say in this example, a white arresting officer to tell the difference between the two. There's no way off of sight.
Right.
The point that he used was to Thomas Sowell's data, there is a 58% household income increase for second generation West Indian families in this country who come here. They live in predominantly Black neighborhoods. They come into larger urban areas, right? But they have a 58%, and there's cultural shifts as to why that is. I mean, we could get into the data on that as well. Hughes did get into the data. We don't need to go down that road. But I think that to a police officer, these West Indian immigrants, second generation, is what the study was done. So born here, but their parents came here. Almost minimal amounts of crime, 58% higher income as far as income inequality or equality.
Yep.
And there's all of these other facts behind this and statistics that are used in Hughes' statement and in Sowell's data that I think we're talking about cultural norms, and lumping all Black people into an African American category is something that somebody like Jesse Jackson wants us to do. But it's really flawed logic.
Yeah, well, and on top of the fact that, I mean, you're talking about the 60s and the 70s, right? So
Yep.
not to you know, again, not to belittle the black experience in 2020, because it's all relative to what you're experiencing in the generation that you grew up in. But any black individual who thinks that there's police brutality now, go back to the 60s and 70s, and where it wasn't just implicit bias. There was clear bias and bigotry in quite a few police departments, and there was no, you know, there was no pushing police brutality under the rug, because it was there, and it was extremely obvious and out in the open. And so, you know, when you take that into account as well, I mean, yeah, I mean, when you look at those demographics and that data under an even more oppressive generation of what you could call systemic in this country, it does make a great point. Yeah, I mean, you know, it's a difficult thing to quantify, because again, you're talking about a study that was done in the 70s, and obviously, you know, generations change, and are the numbers still the same as they were? I think we've talked and we've looked at statistics even more recent, where, you know, you do look at you know, Jamaican Americans and you know, certain other
Haitian,
right, exactly, Haitian Americans,
yep.
Black individuals that, you know, come from somewhere other than Africa,
right.
And it's the same thing. I mean, culturally, there's something in there that leads to higher median household incomes than other, you know, black you know, black communities.
Yeah, and I think that there is quantifiable reasons for that. All of this stuff that we're talking about, I've actually saved a lot of these podcasts and these interviews, so we'll put them into the comment section of this when we roll out this episode.
Yeah,
we'll keep in the comments in the comment section. We'll put a bunch of links to these other podcasts that we're referencing here, with Coleman Hughes and John McWhorter, Glenn Lowry,
right.
Some of these folks, Larry Elder, for example.
Right, which is a great segue, because it's something that not a lot of people may have seen, you know, because of the exposure that some of these black scholars and academics get, as opposed to people who are more in the mainstream supporting the full narrative. You know, I think that's where we move on next, right? I mean, what, you know, why do some individuals get more attention on social media and in the media in general, while some of these great thinkers in general, not just on race, you know, again, we've talked about it before, some of the most intelligent human beings that we've ever listened to, people like Glenn Lowry, John McWhorter, you know, why do they not get as much attention and as much exposure as you think they would, if we were actually willing to educate ourselves and ask the tough questions and have the tough conversations?
Yeah, and I think too that you know, to your point, the one video on social media, I do want to talk about, like, the social media and the media reaction, right?
Yeah.
Because a lot of this had you step away personally from social media because of the things that you were seeing. It has shed light. I have to say that it has shed light on a lot of people's perspectives as to how the world works, that are being more vocal on my social media feeds. That I'm actually surprised at the reactions of some, to be honest with you. Surprised, not necessarily in a negative way. I'm just surprised, right? I think one of the topics that I've seen come up is the Candice Owens video. We know what it is. I know that you've probably seen it as well. It had like something when I saw it, it was up to like 24 million views. And Candice Owens is somebody that I agree with on a very rare basis, I would say. But I felt like, Candice was pretty. She was pretty compelling. I don't feel like her arguments, some of the arguments that she made in that video, were much different than some of the arguments I've heard somebody who I highly respect, John McWhorter, Coleman Hughes, I love, and then Larry Elder make.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, so there's always a difference, right? I mean, when we talk about Glenn Lowry and John McWhorter and even Larry Elder, I mean, all of these guys are academics. John McWhorter and Glenn Lowry are both currently tenured at prestigious universities. Yep. Larry Elder, I believe, got his BA in political science at Brown, and then got his law degree from Michigan State, maybe. But he's more of a personality now. I mean, he's more kind of just in the media, not necessarily an academic who participates in a podcast or conversations like this. And so when you look at somebody like Candice Owens, the problem is that it's easy to
use ad hominem.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's easy to use ad hominem because number one, and there are some times where I'm like, why does Candice Owens need to be part of Turning Point USA? Because if there was a picture of somebody next to smug Anglo-Saxon, it would be Charlie Kirk. Yeah. I really dislike Charlie Kirk. Yeah. But her being involved in that organization, and not necessarily being, she obviously is well educated and articulate, but not necessarily the academic that a lot of people would look to for information, even if she shares the opinion of academics that we respect. And also a lot of her videos are very, it's like, it's for the shock factor. Like the last viral video of her before this most recent one was when she went to Congress to speak on to speak on white privilege and systemic racism and incarceration and stuff like that. And she literally got into an argument with I think it might have even been Jerry Nadler, over something that she said that she didn't actually say in her statement. But again, it's you kind of have to separate it by a lot of different factors, because even generationally, and one of the reasons why I asked you to watch that "I'm Not Racist" video by Joyner Lucas before we came on, when I heard you hadn't seen it, wasn't necessarily for the video, because there's a lot of good things about that video, and there's a lot of different things that we can discuss. But one of the things shortly after watching that video that I found so surprising is that when I went on YouTube and I started watching the reaction videos of that video, yep. Generationally, it was so different, because there would be young black men and women that were just like up in arms, like this like the things that this white guy are saying are so fucking racist, even though it was Joyner Lucas rapping as a white man.
Yeah, voiceover. Yep.
Right, exactly. And then some of them, some older couples, some older black couples would be watching it, or some people would watch with their fathers or with their mothers. Yep. And their mothers and fathers were like, yeah, that's pretty, like it. We do have a problem with single motherhood in this community, and we do have a problem with with black men walking away from their kids or whatever else. They would just say like, oh wow, they're pointing to something that actually exists. And so especially when it comes to people like Glenn Lowry and John McWhorter, who are older, and it's weird that their opinions get so lost in translation lost in translation when they actually they're living through what's going on right now, and they also lived through what happened, closer to the civil rights era. Yep. So it confuses me that the younger Black population and maybe younger generation in general is so quick to, yeah, we're not listening to the older generation even anymore, even though they have so much insight and knowledge and experience when it comes to situations like this.
Right. I think too that in the case of like you talk about somebody like John McWhorter, Glenn Loury. I mean, Glenn Loury is a tenured Harvard professor in economics, right? He just happens to touch on the race issues because in the topic of racial inequality, because they're brought to his attention. People ask him about it, being a very well-educated Black man. People want his perspective on it.
Right.
McWhorter, in my opinion, has taken the work of Noam Chomsky and redefined linguistics in and of itself. I mean, I first learned of those two individuals because Sam Harris had them both on Waking Up, his podcast. Yep. And I listened to these two men speak, and I was just absolutely floored by their knowledge, right? So then you start following their career. Coleman Hughes mentioned something on that Rubin show that I think it sort of speaks to the mindset that the three of them, I can say, probably share. And that mindset is they're not fascinated by the topic of race in this country. Like they're not, it's not something that they find really like worth studying right now or worth preoccupying their time with. But because there's so much misinformation being spread through mainstream media avenues, through some political parties, political affiliates, things like that, they feel as though they're compelled to jump in. I mean, Coleman Hughes made the point where he's like, I don't find the topic of identity politics or anything like that very compelling, but I feel myself compelled to jump in when people start trying to orchestrate a narrative that, quite frankly, it doesn't exist.
Yeah, well, and to your point, I mean, there are moments in that podcast where John McWhorter even says, like, I don't know if what I'm saying is productive and if I should just mind my own business and keep my mouth shut, because there is the factor, like, people are so up in arms and people are so are so pissed off about what happened to George Floyd and police brutality in general, is me coming in and saying, well, if you really look at the data, there may be use of force against Black individuals more in police departments, but there's not really any disproportion when it comes to the killing of Black individuals. Like, does that have, is there any reason for me to bring that up, or should I just keep my mouth shut? Like, is it useful information to those individuals, or should I just let those individuals fight their fight? And Glenn Loury makes the point that you absolutely have to speak up, because there's so much hysteria right now in society over this that it's more damaging. It's more damaging and dangerous not to speak up.
Right. And I think, to your point, Loury makes it's kind of scary to think about, but Loury said if these narratives continue to move forward, we could find ourselves in the awful position where you start to have boisterous groups of white Americans who take to the streets saying things like, we're not apologizing for being white. Right. And that's where you start to tread that dangerous, that's where like that racial division becomes a serious issue and sets us back decades as a country. I mean, it sets us back potentially centuries as a country. And there are folks, I want to emphasize this, that I do believe that there are racists in America. I think that absolutely. I think that the number of racists is hard to quantify, right? Because I think that there's folks who are racist that wouldn't acknowledge the fact that they're racist, things like that. But I also think that there's not any longer I've not seen any statistical evidence that would indicate to me, and Larry Elder does a great job. We're going to put the link to the conversation he had with Dave Rubin. Larry Elder did a great job saying, like, you give me an example of systemic racism in America. Give me an example. And Rubin brought up things. He brought up police, to where Larry Elder rattled off the statistics that were backed behind the Freddie Gray in Baltimore, and 4% of 968 people killed were African Americans that were killed by cops. He rattled off information about the whole thing about like affirmative action, right? He's against affirmative action. However, if the idea is that education is a pathway towards success, then the argument can be made that Black communities have more of a pathway because of affirmative action, where you have a Black individual who gets an SAT score and a GPA of X against a white individual who gets that same SAT score and a GPA of X, and that Black individual has a leg up. So if you take all of that into consideration to make an assertion that there's systemic racism in America, I didn't know how I felt about the topic. And the more that I listen to these people that have these backgrounds, I think that there's racists in this country. It's unfortunate. You can't eradicate it, unfortunately. I think that it's just one of those things. It's a taught behavior, much like what Sam Harris alluded to early on with Coleman Hughes when he made when he drew the parallel between a religious ideology. If you grow up teaching young children that they're inherently flawed from birth, that's problematic. It's morally reprehensible. And Glenn Lowry mentioned the same thing. He said, he's got all his kids are all grown up and out of school. And he said, I would be damned. He said, I would be, and I've never heard him swear, right. But he said, I would be a shit fucking parent if I told my kid at 18 years old that his success was directly impacted by the color of his skin. He said, I would be a shit parent for telling my kid that.
Yeah. And I mean, so something else, folks, these individuals that we're talking about, not that it should matter, but they are Black. Glenn Lowry, John McWhorter, they are Black individuals. And this is part of, when you see all of the people posting on their Instagram, educate yourself.
Yep.
This is part of what should be educating yourself, is listening to opposing opinions. And that's not to say I've been listening to plenty of Ta-Nehisi Coates videos, yep. Cornel West videos, yep. Angela Harris videos. The whole point of educating yourself is to get the full picture and get multiple opinions from people who know what they're talking about, and then come up with your own opinion. Yep. So if saying educate yourself is just, hey, here's the narrative that's being pushed in the mainstream right now, here's the narrative being pushed by Black Lives Matter specifically, this is what you should be educating yourself on. This is the website that you should be visiting to educate yourself. It's not the way to do it. And that's one of the reasons why we decided to have the show, just the two of us this week, is because we did want to bring some of this stuff to light. Again, we're not even having a conversation right now about the Black experience or assuming that we know what it's like to be Black in America, or suggesting that it's the same as being white in America. We're just specifically speaking on some of the research that we've done and some of the things that we found in our attempt to educate ourselves during this extremely unique time in America, because we can speak to the civil rights era, right? But when it comes to the what's going on right now and the impact that things like social media has on a movement like this, it's extremely important to draw a line and discuss, what the differences are between now and then. And so I know you spoke to it earlier, but you were talking about my absence from Facebook lately.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, I mean, I felt like
it's been a popular topic. I've been receiving text messages, emails, really? Yeah, Facebook messages. Where's Ben? Why is Ben not chiming in?
Yeah, I had to step away. I had a couple of interactions with close friends who had some trouble separating the discussion that we were having about George Floyd and about optic allyship specifically, which for a lot of you that don't know, it's kind of it's a fairly new term that's been created to explain people who kind of just support the narrative on the surface of their social media or on the surface verbally, and don't really focus on what's going on behind the scenes and the root causes of what's going on in, you know, in this case with race and police brutality and George Floyd. And so having those interactions, and then shortly after that, just seeing the rioting and seeing the looting and seeing how people were justifying it and comparing it to things like the Boston Tea Party, and it was just very overwhelming. And it was a
Native Americans. I've seen the meme with the Native Americans as well.
Right. Yeah. It's not that I'm running from the issue, because again, you know, I just finished I just finished a couple of audiobooks on this very topic. And so I'm still continuing to educate myself and listening to reputable individuals discuss it, seeing what I can do as an individual to help in these situations. I've made donations, but in terms of social media and just, you know, seeing over and over and over again the same people who are probably posting on social media and then going back to whatever they're binging on Netflix or,
right.
You know, it's just, it's a little bit too fake and overwhelming for me to continue to engage, when really what 99% of the people that are on there posting just want to look like they're on the correct side of history and morality, and not be challenged and not have the tough conversations. Right. And that really bothers me, because I'm always questioning, always trying to create dialogue, always trying to understand what different people's perspectives are. And when it's just like, I don't really care what you have to say, or I don't really care what you studied, this is how I feel, and you're kind of an asshole for even bringing it up in the first place.
Yep.
I'm not going to continue to engage with that. So my thought was, get off of Facebook so that it's not continuously pissing me off throughout the day. Continue to do the podcast with you, and, you know, if I want to post something about me and my friends golfing, or I see something that, you know, strikes a chord with me, you know, emotionally or ideologically, I'll certainly post it on Instagram. But for now, I'm off of Facebook. That's just my personal decision.
I want to get your take. I think that's important, because, like I said, the amount of fan mail I've been receiving about where in the world is Ben Grant, you know, it's been like Carmen Sandiego. But I've enthralled myself in this topic. The topic of anti-racism is what I think Ibram X. Kendi would call it. He has a book out that's climbed the New York Times bestseller list. I actually even most recently read Coleman Hughes's basically picking apart of X. Kendi's book, How to Be an Anti-Racist. And, you know, I think, you know, for me, the topic is very heavy. It's very deep. The things that are going on are they're deep rooted. And, one of the things that I've not been able to come across, and I'm curious on this, because if you ask, is possible fixes, right? You hear in the news about demands being made of police departments, of local county governments, things like that. You know, Coleman Hughes, his claim to fame was when he debated Coates on reparations on the House floor. On bill, I think it was like SB 40, and he debated against reparation payments. I want to put a disclaimer on that, because Coleman Hughes's argument was on reparations, and he swayed me, because, you know, I've always been vocal about reparation payments as being a morally right, ethically right thing to do.
Up until like last week or 2 weeks.
Yeah, up until last week.
Yeah.
And Hughes persuaded me where he said, yeah, he's for reparation payments, but he's for reparation payments of people who live directly under Jim Crow. He's for those people. He's all, and then you have somebody like Larry Elder who his solution is abolishment of the welfare state, because that's where things went wrong in black households, single family households. There was government incentivized, don't marry a man, marry the government. That was sort of like the Lyndon Johnson take on everything.
Yeah.
And I think that that's drastic. I like Coleman Hughes's reparations idea. I think abolishing, and I think like, somebody like McWhirter or Lowry would agree with me. I think at this point, abolishing the welfare state would do more harm than good. That's sort of my take, but I love Larry Elder. Really quick, my whole thing, I love Larry Elder talking about privatized Social Security, right? Because now you have a situation where you have your Social Security privatized, and when you pass on, you can pass that money on to your closest living relatives. And I think that there's a lot to be said for that across many communities, not just black communities.
Right. Yeah, I mean, so I actually agree with you. I don't think that abolishing the welfare system would be the best move, but there needs to be something that changes systemically, at least where that is concerned, to maybe incentivize nuclear families, right? Because and a lot of black men will even say this, is that one of the issues is that right now they live in a system where it feels like any black woman can have a child with a black man and come back and say the government is going to take care of me better than you can. And so
but I think that notion actually stems across multiple races, right? Like I have direct family members who are in that situation. I'm going to be taken care of. Here's two kids with two different fathers. They're both out of the picture, and I'm going to marry the government in this situation, right? Like that whole welfare state mentality, and it sets people up perennially to live in poverty, because the second you reach an income threshold, the second you take those initiatives to build up your own livelihood, all of that comes crashing down, and you lose the subsidized housing, you lose the funding from the federal government, and then you end up actually worse off, living in worse areas, being in worse school districts, being in and I think that function right now in this country, I don't believe it to be systemically racist. I think, unfortunately, there's a large portion of the black community who suffer from it. But I think that that's just a systemic issue, right? Like I don't think that it's racially charged, but I think that it's a significant problem, and it spans multiple races.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you. It's just in terms of a fix, right? There needs to be more. There needs to be more data, or at least more study done on why that is the way that it is in the black community specifically. Because, I mean, keep in mind that the single motherhood rate in the black community is over 70% right now.
Well, the war on poverty, right? Like Larry Elder would say, the war on poverty is a huge reason for that. The war on poverty, essentially establishing the welfare state predominantly in black communities back in the 70s, said like, Lyndon Johnson literally had people knocking on people's doors and saying things like, hey, you got a man in the house? No? Good. Then we'll give you this government funding. And that's how the policy was set out.
Yeah.
I mean, that's problematic, right? Because it added significantly to the decline of, or to the increase of the single family household in a lot of communities. And you see that happening now across multiple races in America. You see even in white communities, whereas in the 70s it was like 5% of white communities had children born into single family household. Now it's 25%. In the year 2020, we're at 25% in white households. There's a significant, and that's because of the current system.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah,
that's my opinion on it anyway.
Yeah, I mean, it's such a tough thing because it's we're talking about the way things are in this country, right? And then we're trying to put a historical context on everything, where the consensus on where race actually became an issue isn't even really ironed out, right? I mean, there are people who believe that racism really started with slavery in the United States, and then there are scholars who will say it actually started in the 1400s with the Spanish Inquisition when religion was a huge factor, and they couldn't decide, or they couldn't differentiate between individuals and their religion, so they started focusing more on skin color, as a way to separate different cultural groups, right?
Well, you even had it. I mean, let's break that down a little bit because you talk about cultural groups. You even have that in Rwanda. You talk about the Rwandan genocide, and you have Hutus and Tutsis. These were cultural groups who were split in denomination based on facial features, sizes of their ears, things like that. I mean, absolutely the most ludicrous concepts that could be constructed in human society, and that's how cultures were broken out. I mean, Thomas Sowell, I don't agree with everything that he says in terms of your point on where slavery kind of began, because I think slavery is as old as time. It's been around for as long as human beings have, right?
Well, yeah, I mean, I didn't mean slavery. I meant there are some individuals who think that racism started with slavery, and then there are some individuals that believe that racism started a lot further back.
Right.
In terms of our current conceptualization of what racism is and where its origins began.
Yeah.
And so, to your point, yeah, I mean, it's true. I mean, there's different forms of racism and bigotry around the world, and it isn't always just white versus black, or white versus people of color, or the issue with colonization, or yeah.
I mean, hey, we had this conversation the other day, you and I on the phone, and I told you, look, if you ask my mom, the biggest threat to Irish people is other Irish people. And that has been the history of the existence of Ireland, right? So, I mean,
I mean, other than very specific groups, right? That's pretty much, like you can make a case, like, and me being a young Jewish male, right? Like the Jewish population is so small in the world that they're probably one group that can say the biggest danger to Jewish people aren't other Jewish people. Like, they're still hated around the world, whether it be by the Muslim community or by other Middle Eastern countries. They're such a small population, but yeah, I mean, when you look at the Middle East, and Middle Eastern individuals, when you factor in religion and stuff like that, you have the biggest danger to Muslims are other Muslims, other more extremist Muslims. It's the same thing with the black community, and we don't bring it up because it's not the point, because it is kind of again, it's one of those things that can just be explained away with statistics. The biggest danger to black people in this country from a statistical basis is other black people. Black people kill each other at higher rates than white people kill black people all day long.
Over 70% would be the actual statistics most recently, and I think that that stems across any race, right? Like white people kill more
Yeah,
white people
right,
than
exactly.
you know what I mean. I get
that's my overall point is that
Yeah.
you can break those down into cultural or religious groups or however you want to break it down, but it's always going to be the case.
I just want to I've mentioned this to you several times, I feel like, but I just want to throw it out there because this is really has been my belief, is my belief, and very likely always will be my belief, and I'm always reluctant to say that. But I use the story of my beloved, the late great Christopher Hitchens, where he used to renew his press pass every year to get his press pass with so he could interview senators and things like that in DC in the Capitol.
Yep.
And he tells that he told the story of he walked in there was a security guard where you have to sign in, you fill out all the information, and they finally started adding how you identify yourself, black, white, Hispanic, the whole thing. And he didn't fill that section out initially when he saw it, and he gave it back to the security guard. The security guard said to him, "Okay, listen, you have to fill this out." And he was like, and Christopher Hitchens said to the security guard, "Well, I don't identify with any of these races you have here." He goes, and the guy say, the security guard said, "Put white." And he goes, "Well, white's not even a color, let alone a race." And the guy said, "Well, how about then Caucasian? Put Caucasian." And he goes, "I don't have any lineage that is derived from the Caucasus region of the world. There's no point in me putting that there either." He goes, "Then put whatever you want, just select other." So Hitchens selected other and put human, right? And that's always the way that I've kind of looked at these things. I'm not religious. I'm very open anti-theist. I talk to anybody about that. I'm not, and I don't consider myself an atheist. I consider myself somebody who, even if you could prove to me that any one religion were to be true, I would think that it would be a terrible, terrible thing. That's what I believe. Now, I think that with that being said, I think that, if you go to that Hitchens mindset with like human beings, right? You have a little bit more, it opens things up a little bit. And my belief, not being religious, is all humans started in one area of the world. We all came from one area of the world. We all came from the Fertile Crescent area. Ironically enough, happens to be Africa and the Middle East, and that is the first sign of humanity.
300 to 500,000 years ago.
Exactly. Regardless of what King James will tell you.
All that changed was where we decided to settle on either side of the equator.
Exactly. And that's always and that's always been my take. It always will be my take. But I'm really glad that we were able to open up this dialogue between you and I, especially because, quite frankly, I don't get many conversations like this. There's probably a handful of folks in my personal life.
Yeah.
And I'm sure you could say the same, who I feel like I can go and have these conversations. And the fact that we can do this
without losing a friendship, absolutely.
Yeah, in a podcast
right.
type. I can't go to everybody, Ben, and say, "Hey, I consider myself an anti-theist." I can't say that to everybody without them completely writing me off.
Yeah.
But at any rate, as always, we like to keep things a little bit lighter here.
Yeah.
Towards the end of our segments, so you and I are going to do a 5 random rapid fire round, and you tricked me into reading off your questions before the show started. So I don't know what you're going to ask me, but you know what I'm going to ask you. So I'm going to start. Let's get this out of the way. And my 5 questions for you. Favorite president?
I'd go Lincoln. I know it's a really generic.
Yeah, serious
answer. I just think historically. I just think historically he's been the greatest impact on how other than the forefathers, in terms of like in the middle of this country's life, in terms of how like his presidency molded the way this country was going to go moving forward. With his policies and his political beliefs and his activism and the actions that he took as president with the Civil War or whatever else, versus somebody more recent. he is my favorite president. So
I would have guessed Trump. All right, so
wait. But who's yours then?
Who's mine?
Yeah.
So when I asked you favorite president, you gave me such a politically correct answer. My whole thing here was I wanted you to give me your favorite president in your lifetime. That's like me saying that my favorite baseball player was Sandy Koufax. I wasn't even a thought in my father's brain when Sandy Koufax threw a baseball. You know what I mean? Like, come on, man. Give me the
I don't think I have a favorite president in my life.
You have to pick one. You have to pick one. And you can start with, like, when was Ben? You were born what, 87, 88?
Yeah.
Both years or one or
no,
what?
87.
Okay, so you can choose any president between 87 and 2020, and you have to choose one. Who are you taking? It's not an easy question.
I mean, probably Reagan because he was president.
Probably Trump.
No, probably Reagan. Because he was president until 89, right? So I was at least 2.
Okay.
Yeah, probably Reagan.
Okay. All right. That's fair. So I'm going George W.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm going George W. And I'm not ashamed of it. All right, next question. We can't elaborate. Maybe at another show.
Yeah.
Favorite rapper?
Oh, wait, I thought I was going next.
No. Let me rattle off the 5.
Okay.
Favorite rapper?
Favorite rapper, Nas.
Wow. Over Tupac, Biggie.
Yeah. I think Nas when you compare his lyrical ability and the impact that he had on like rap and hip hop a little bit closer to when we were like adolescents.
Yep.
He's one of the most underrated MCs of all time.
Yeah, I mean, I'd put him below even Lil Wayne, but that's fine. That's fine. I always say Lil Wayne's the best rapper alive. So just ask him.
Lil Wayne also underrated if you listen to his early stuff.
Mixtape Lil Wayne. There's nothing better.
Yeah.
Favorite sport. Now this is something I wanted to ask you because I could guess. Can I guess first, and then you tell me if I'm right?
Yeah.
I would guess football. Am I wrong?
Favorite sport to watch and study? Yeah, it's football. My favorite sport to play is still basketball.
Okay, that's fair.
Like my body type and me having to transition into wrestling in high school because I couldn't be a 275-pound shooting guard. That was probably one of the saddest things I ever had to do in my entire life. Yep. So yeah, I would say basketball is my favorite sport to play. Football is definitely I know more about football than any other sport. And I love watching it more than any other sport, but basketball to play, yeah.
Nice. Okay. That's my guess was football, but it's interesting. This is what this show's all about.
Right.
Best boxer ever. Now, the reason I asked you this was because this thing came out recently. ESPN ranked Muhammad Ali as the greatest boxer ever. Floyd Mayweather very upset. Floyd Mayweather was very upset about it because Floyd a couple years ago, Money Mayweather ranked Ali, I think, 6th behind like Roberto Duran, and he had. I would put Ali. Jack Johnson.
I would put Ali 4 or 5.
Okay. So who's the best boxer ever?
So it's very. I would say Mayweather.
Attaboy, Ben.
It's very close because I think Sugar Ray Robinson is right up there too. And then you also have to remember that if there is no Mayweather, Pacquiao would also be in that conversation because of what he did in his record in boxing as well. So I would put Ali 4 or 5. But yeah, I would put Mayweather first.
Yeah, Mayweather's never been knocked down in his career. He's never seen what the mat looks like.
Yeah.
Think about that. Undefeated, never seen the mat. All right, last question that I have for you. Favorite non-American food, and I only asked you this so I could tell you mine.
Okay. I would go Mexican.
Really? Is there a certain dish? Like a certain are you talking like taco, or are you talking like
so I love like more of the I do love like the standard like tacos, burritos, but I love carnitas. I love papusas. There
Yep.
are a few different ethnic dishes that I love in that category.
Yep. And mine is this is going to be a surprise to you, but it won't be after I say it. My favorite non-American food that I've ever had is Bosnian, and it's really not close. Bosnian cuisine transformed my life. For those of you who don't know, I have a friend who's very near and dear to my heart. I grew up in and around his household, and the food that his mom makes. I mean, his mom literally makes me my favorite dish on my birthday every year.
What is it? What is it?
It's called pita, and you make it with phyllo dough, and you can put in like a meat or cheese or potato. You know, the Irish in me loves the potato one. But it comes in a spiral, the phyllo dough spiral, and it is.
I mean, it's Greek people make the same sort of thing.
Same concept. There's a lot. Cevapcici is out there. It is up there for me too. There's a lot. Bosnian cuisine. No, cevapcici. It's different.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, a little bit different, but Bosnian cuisine for me. But I'm going to let you rattle off these questions to me, and I'm nervous because you said you weren't holding back here.
Yeah, I didn't. I had some interesting questions, some simple ones.
Throw me some softballs.
So you need to create a 3-person debate team to debate really anything in politics or history. Who are the 3 guys you pick?
Like anybody spanning any genre, any. Like, what are you talking about? Dead or alive? Living?
No, they need to be alive, but yeah. Because dead would make it easier.
Yeah, dead would make it easier. Oh, geez. So I have to choose 2 plus me or 3 plus me?
No, you just have to choose 3. Because we know you wouldn't be part of the team. So
oh, my God. Okay,
if somebody was like, we're gonna make a world debate team, and we're gonna like choose from all of the, but you get the pick of the first 3 people. Who do you choose?
Oh, well, Sam Harris was the first name that came to my head when you brought it up. Yeah. I'm going Sam Harris.
Yeah.
I'm going Coleman Hughes.
Okay.
Surprise! I love Coleman Hughes.
Yeah.
We'll be sharing videos of him, and then just to drive them both insane, but also somebody who I have read extensively, Daniel Dennett. The philosophy professor over at Tufts University.
Yeah,
I love Dan Dennett. If you ever want to feel stupid about anything, read or listen to a TED Talk or a YouTube video of Daniel Dennett. I'm telling you.
Yeah, I mean my list would be similar. Definitely have Sam Harris.
Yeah.
Ben Shapiro would be in there though, because
of course he would.
He's the greatest debater on earth.
Of course he would.
Dude,
of course.
Have you watched their hour-long interview, Ben Shapiro and Sam Harris?
Oh yeah. Of course I've seen it. Yeah.
It's great. It's great. Okay.
I think Dan Dennett would make Ben Shapiro probably vomit on his shoes because I mean I've never seen anybody like Daniel Dennett will make your head spin in a circle. The philosophy is.
It's true. I mean, when I say Ben Shapiro gets stuck debating people like Cenk Uygur, from the Young Turks. Right. I mean, it's easy to look great when you're debating.
Right, exactly.
All right. One cocktail for the rest of your life. What is it?
Does it have to be a cocktail, or can it just be a drink?
I mean, yeah, a drink is
Easy enough. I'm in the camp with Adam. Johnny Walker, Black Label.
Okay, all right.
I'm in the camp with.
It's a great answer. Most disliked political personality or activist, like a guy that's always shows up on your feed and you're like, "Fuck this guy, I hate him."
Oh my God, there's so many. Oh, there's literally so many. That's really, really difficult.
Yeah, I mean, I told you I wasn't pulling any punches with these.
Wow.
If we ever do this again and it's just the 2 of us, you better bring it next time.
Oh my God, seriously, I gave you all these layups, and here you go. Oh my God, and I'm thinking you skewed my perspective because now I'm thinking of somebody who comes up on my news feed, but it doesn't have to be that, right? It can just be an activist or somebody's opinion who annoys the shit out of me.
Yeah, absolutely. Mine is on my news feed. That's why I brought it up. Can't stand Hassan Piker from the Young Turks.
Oh, okay. Yep.
Yeah.
That okay.
Made his career basically just bashing Tommy Lauren videos, which is how hard is that?
Right.
Yeah.
Right. No, that's a good that is a good one. I'm gonna go a step further, and people aren't gonna like it, and it's how I feel. If I could choose one person that I like or that I like the least,
Yeah.
hate strong, but I'd say like the least.
Yeah.
I'd say Reverend Jesse Jackson.
Yeah.
I would say the Reverend Jesse Jackson. I can't stand the most of. I mean, this is somebody who like colloquially coined the term African American to all black people.
Right.
It's like, you know what I mean? Like, well, no. What if you're from Jamaica?
Yeah.
And now it's a mainstream talking point.
It's also a thing to like exploit black fear so that you can go live in white neighborhoods. Like,
yeah, exactly. Yeah. Exactly. No, I mean, that's fair. And like his takes on religion. I mean, how many times did he have to have a debate with somebody like Christopher Hitchens and be absolutely humiliated before he just stopped? I mean, it's just pure ignorance. You know what I mean? It's anyway, good question.
Right. Better feeling, hitting a great golf shot or scoring a goal in soccer?
Oh my God! You would have asked me this 6 months ago, boy. I'll tell you.
I know, but now you're sticking greens, and I know it's.
Oh my God! You're right, dude. I'll tell you what, though. I haven't played soccer in some time, thanks a lot, COVID. There really is no better feeling, in my opinion. You know, scoring a goal is. Like the amount of overwhelming emotion that goes into that moment where like, and I have a history. I don't know if I have any of my previous college soccer teammates watching this, but I have a good story that you'll appreciate. I'd say scoring a goal first off, but I'll end it. Is that question 5 or 4?
4.
Okay. I'll give you some context on this story. I scored a goal. It was a game deciding goal against Anna Maria College in when I played in college. It was my junior year.
Yeah.
And I scored this goal, and my parents happened to be at this game. I was dating somebody who happened to be at this game, and my grandfather was at this game.
Wow.
I scored this goal, ripped my shirt off, darted towards the sideline, and the sideline judge threw the offside flag up. And it was one of the most embarrassing moments I've ever had. And my teammates to this day don't let me live it down. But that's the overwhelming emotion that you have when you score a goal that just like instinctually, I didn't even think about it. Just ripped my shirt off, took the yellow card, goal didn't count.
So it would be more like, I mean, it would be more comparable to like hitting a hole in one or like it would need to be that special. Okay.
If I hit a hole in one, I'm taking my shirt off and I'm running around a golf course. Yes, absolutely.
All right. Last one, and it's another doozy.
Oh, God. Killing me.
One historical or philosophical point that you feel people constantly get wrong.
What? Oh, my God. Okay, I know what I'm going to... I know what... Actually, I thought I knew what I was going to say. Historical or philosophical point, huh?
Yeah, like something like, you know, mine is people for some reason think that Palestine was a place before, you know what I mean? Like they never acknowledged that like they were always a region that was controlled by the British, before that the Ottoman Empire, before that the Byzantines, before that the Romans. Like they think it was like this country that the Jews came and stole, you know. So that's one that constantly gets under my skin in the historical context of, you know, Israel's self-determination. So something like that, or it can be philosophical where like people just like, you know, don't.
Can it be scientific?
Yeah, scientific is fine as well.
Okay. If I can include scientific, I'll say people who tell me that they don't believe in evolution because evolutionary theory, right? Like I've read The Selfish Gene by Richard Dawkins twice, and understood it less the second time. But I hear the argument made all the time that it's a theory. Evolution is a theory. No, evolution is a fact. It's called evolutionary theory because it's still being built upon. Right. You can't have something stone cold fact and call it a theory, right? Like you can still build off concepts of evolution.
Right.
I know that's kind of a lame answer, probably not what you were looking for. I mean,
no, but as an anti-theist, it makes complete sense that it would be something that would really piss you off. So, all right.
Yeah, I mean, it bothers me.
It's sort of historical when you consider how long it's been debated. So,
listen, I have a book that sits on the ottoman in my living room, and I leave it out for when people come over. Just to kind of, especially in the South, just to kind of gauge. And it's Christopher Hitchens' book, God is Not Great. So, I don't mind making people uncomfortable.
Yeah, if you go and if you invite somebody new over and you go and get them a drink and they're not in the living room anymore, it was never meant to be.
Exactly. Let's see if this person's up to being my friend. So anyway, yeah, those were tough questions.
Yeah, I told you I wasn't playing around.
Jeez,
favorite sport.
Oh God! I'm just what's your favorite sport? God, just mocking me now. All right. Anyway, I guess on that note, we sign off next week.
We will have a guest next week. I don't care if we have to invite.
We have folks that want to. We just wanted to tackle these topics on our own. Also, when this gets posted, I believe it'll be later on this evening. When this gets, is that right or am I wrong?
This evening or tomorrow morning. It depends on how long it takes to download, but or sometimes it takes a while for YouTube to like finish it or whatever they call it. Yeah, process it. But yes, within the next 24 hours.
All right, perfect. So within the next 24 hours, this video will be posted, folks, and we'll also. I'll make sure that we insert the links to some of the topics, the podcasts, the interviews that we were discussing during our conversation here.
Nick is now in control of the Facebook aspect of Ad Hominem, so you can expect to see those links there. Otherwise, subscribe, share, whatever you can do to get us more viewers, because we want more people to hear what we have to say and to get more guests to get their perspectives.
Even if those of you who want to come on and tell Ben and I how much of a
suck,
or we're racist assholes, well, whatever you want to say, we want to have you on so we can open this dialogue, because it does go a long way.
Yeah. Nick, Ben, Ad Hominem signing off. Have a great week, everyone.